Good evening. You are watching Asia in Review. I'm your host, David Day, and this is a ThinkTech Global broadcast. We are coming to you live from Pioneer Plaza at the core of downtown Honolulu. And our show today is called The Nuclear Deal with Iran. And to help us with this particular program, we have two very extraordinary guests. In the studio with me is Mr. David Santoro, who is a nuclear expert with the Pacific Forum CSIS here in Honolulu. And coming at us live from the Fletcher School of International Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University is Professor Jeswald Salacuse. And Jess, nice to have you with us again. Thank you for staying up so late there in Boston.
Thanks for the invitation, David.
For those of you who do not know, Dr. Salacuse is the former dean of the Fletcher School and is a prolific writer on the topic of negotiations. He's a member of the faculty and the executive committee of the Harvard Program in Negotiations and a visiting professor of law at Harvard Law School. Jess has just come from a class at the law school. And but perhaps for this discussion, this particular program, I mean, we have a negotiations expert and we have a nuclear expert to help us with this. And for this program, I want you all to know that David Santoro's ethnic background, I think that's right, ethnic
I guess that's how you can put it.
That's how you put it, is he is formerly a French national.
I still,
Oh, you're still a dual passport?
No, actually, I only have a French passport.
Okay, all right.
So,
and so he can give us a European perspective on this particular deal. And Dr. Salacuse has lived in the Middle East for several years in both Lebanon and the Sudan. And Jess, help me with this. You have also been a consultant or advisor to governments in the Middle East on negotiation strategy and tactics and various deals, have you not?
Yeah, yes. I was working with them on various policy issues. I was with the Ford Foundation for about 7 years, primarily in the Middle East.
So let's start this particular show by kind of helping those of you in the audience understand a little bit about the general parameters, what the deal was. And so let me turn to David. Would you help us with that? What is this deal kind of, I'll use the words all about, and I don't mean you can't get into everything, but generally what's the deal about?
okay. First of all, let me thank you for being here, and good to be talking to you, Jess, as well, over there in Boston. Now, the deal is between Iran and the major power, the P5+1, and it's...
Wait. Who's in that P5+1?
So the P5+1 is the United States, Russia, China, France, the United Kingdom, and Germany.
Okay.
And it's basically a 6 months deal, an interim deal that gives time and space to negotiate a more comprehensive agreement to find a solution to the nuclear issue crisis that has been going on since the early 2000s.
So, Mr. Producer, if you would put up photograph number 1 for us here, and Jess, you cannot see this, but this is kind of a picture of the various sites and problem areas in Iran. And again, David, what are the deal points here?
So the deal points is to try and stop, freeze, or neutralize some of the key sensitive areas of Iran's nuclear program. One aspect is enrichment, and that's it has been one of the most controversial issues between the P5+1 and Iran. And so Iran, for instance, has agreed to not install new centrifuges which are used for enrichment purposes, to not conduct more work at its Arak heavy water reactor, that is also a controversial issue. Okay. So all these sensitive areas are being kept, and strong verification measures are being implemented during this 6-month interim time, which is meant to help again, give time for
So
negotiations.
this is really a temporary deal, trying to freeze the situation more or less.
Exactly. It's
And-
basically helping the two sides get to negotiation, give them time to negotiate something that will be more comprehensive and, of course, much harder to negotiate.
Okay, and then in return for this, Iran is getting some sanctions lifted, and there's been a lot of complaints about that. What's that?
Right. So in return for this deal and the concessions that Iran has made, the P5+1 have agreed to relieve Iran from a number of sanctions. Now, it's only a modest sanctions relief. I think it's the equivalent is $7 billion, and the vast majority of sanctions are still in place and will continue to hurt Iran's economy.
Okay, and then there's some kind of mutual pledge that the two parties have entered into, having to address what?
So there's a number of concerns, of course, that have not been addressed by the deal, and that are sort of left for the comprehensive deal that will be negotiated. One of them, for instance, includes concerns at a particular site that Iran has conducted weaponization activities, and that's not addressed in that specific deal, but it's one of the issues that will have to be tackled as the negotiators move forward on a longer-term agreement.
So the bottom line of this is we have a temporary 6-month baby freeze.
Right.
And,
Now, it's very significant at the same time. I mean, I want to stress this because during over the past decade, the P5+1 in Iran, of course, there have been ups and downs in negotiations, but at the same time, no deal had really been crafted. So now we have, even though it's an interim deal, there's still a lot of work to be done to find a comprehensive solution. There is a deal. There is something that the two sides have agreed upon and are prepared to move forward on.
Okay, so depending on your perspective, you get something like either a Neil Armstrong giant step forward for humanity or a small step, but at least it's a step.
Right. Well, I mean, exactly. That's right. And personally, I would say that we should be cautiously optimistic about what has just been agreed.
Okay, so Jess, let's get some help from you on kind of beginning to put some flesh on the bones of this agreement, and let's step back a moment and allow me, if I might, to use some of your experience, your background, and your life and consulting work in the Middle East, and help us understand about the two things: the context and culture of these negotiations that have taken place, and then once we do that, we'll get into a little bit of Hassan Rouhani's personal background, and we'll talk more about him as you get into that. But help us understand the context that these negotiations have taken place.
Well, the context take place within some 35 years of absolute hostility between Iran and the United States. We really haven't connected. We really haven't engaged. If you remember, I think that this was one of the axis of evil for George Bush. And we were the great Satan as far as Iran was concerned. So there's been tremendous hostility. So I really think this is kind of historic that we have come to any kind of an agreement, and the tone of the dialogue that's been going on, I think, is a lot more productive than what was going on before. I mean, we seem to be working in what we in negotiation refer to as a kind of a problem-solving mode, trying to deal with this very, very knotty problem. And the rhetoric that you're hearing is very different from the kind of rhetoric you heard from Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the predecessor president of Iran, who was extremely provocative, seemingly anti-Semitic, very anti-Zionist, and did what he could to provoke. I think with Rouhani coming to power as president, we have a very different tone and a very different.
Jess, hold 1 second on Rouhani. While you're talking about him, Mr. Producer, could you put up photograph number 8, then going to 9, and Hassan Rouhani, Jess, is the new president of Iran. He's what, the
Yes.
seventh president?
I guess yes. He's very new. He represents a more. He is a cleric, but he represents a more pragmatic part of the Iranian government. He is a technocrat. He's also a cleric, but he's a technocrat. And he's also a man who's been quite exposed to the West. He holds a doctorate from a doctoral degree from a Scottish university in Glasgow. So this is someone who is familiar with the West. I think he's familiar in with international relations, whereas I think his predecessor was a much more narrow individual,
Right.
and than Rouhani is. So. When we see about what we in negotiation always look at these which seem like stalemate conflicts where nobody's making any progress, and suddenly in this case we've got some progress, or at least the tone is quite different. And I think one of the things that happens is you have really two different leaders. If you remember, when in 2008, one of the things that Obama wanted to do was, and he said it, he wanted to engage Iran.
Right.
And it is apparent that Hassan Rouhani, the new president, would like to engage the United States. It's very interesting. There was an interview published in the Financial Times over the weekend, a long interview with Hassan Rouhani, and the tone was quite different. I mean, it's the first time I heard any Iranian leader of his level say anything remotely polite or good about an American leader. He had this conversation with Barack Obama, and he said that, quote, I think the quote was that Obama's talk was smart and polite. So there was he is clearly trying to seek a different tone. I think he believes that instead of confrontation, one needs to try to negotiate in order to advance the interests of Iran.
You know, I one of the things that I noticed about Rouhani's background, David and Jess, one of the things I noticed was that in addition to all of the very important points that Jess has just made, and to further underscore those, is that there is a principle in negotiations that sometimes when you have a stalemate, if you change negotiators, that you can get or leadership.
I mean, I think that who you have at the table matters a lot. It changes the dynamics. It changes the atmospherics. I think it's central.
Well, I think,
Well,
go ahead, Jess.
Well, I'm just going to say, if you look at some of the intractable conflicts that suddenly became more amenable to change, often there are several factors, but one of them that's often happens is you have a change of leadership. And in a sense, there's been a change of leadership on both sides. Barack Obama in 2008, and now Hassan Rouhani in 2013, 5 years apart, but it took some time. But that change in the personalities, and I agree with David, it's who negotiates, the personalities is important. It's not determinative, but it really is important. And of course, he has not been at the table. The person at the table has been his foreign minister, Mohammad Zarif.
But here's the part that's interesting, and Jess, and we're gonna hold up here because we're gonna go to a commercial break. But I want to raise this one point. One of the things that's fascinating about Rouhani's step into the presidency of Iran and this whole change of attitude, if you will, coming from Iran, is that he personally is an experienced negotiator involving Iran's nuclear situation in the past. So he knows the issues in considerable depth, I believe.
Oh yes.
And so this.
And he's been, but that's right. When I said he was not at the table, that means I don't mean that he has not been very much
right.
involved in these negotiations. And in fact, it was the conversation that was had when he was at the UN. There was a telephone conversation between Barack Obama and Rouhani, I think, which gave some momentum to this new opening, if you will, between the United States and Iran.
Okay, well, that's all the time that we have before our break here. You're watching Asian Review, the nuclear deal with Iran. I'm your host, David Day, and we'll be back with you right after the break. We'll see you on the other side. We're back. You're watching Asian Review. I'm your host, David Day, and we're talking about this evening the nuclear deal with Iran. And as our special guests, I have David Santoro with Pacific Forum CSIS. David is a nuclear expert and carries a French passport, and that's a pretty cool combination on this topic.
Okay.
On this topic. And then we've got Professor Jeswald Salacuse from the Fletcher School of Law and International Diplomacy. Jess, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you are an international negotiations guru any way that you cut it. So probably the man in the world, if you will, on this topic. And so at the break, in case you just joined us, we were having a discussion, Jess and I were having a discussion about the kind of the context of the change in leadership both in the United States as well as in Iran that has allowed this deal to move forward. But let's move up to the 50,000 foot level and look at the geopolitical context of this deal in a broader context there in the Middle East and its ramifications. And Jess, what's your picture, your viewpoint as we move up to the 50,000 foot level and look at the context that this deal is being worked in?
Well, you can look at a negotiation or the product of a negotiation in two ways. One is a deal, and the other is a relationship. And I think what's going on here is we're focusing on the deal and the details of the deal. But this deal can lead to a relationship, or at least a change in the relationship between the United States and Iran. And that is of concern for some people. I think we have to understand that, for example, that Iran is a Shia country. The Shia have always felt they are seen by the Sunni Muslims, the majority Muslims, as almost a heterodox group, heretics for some people. In fact, there was a survey that said a lot of Muslims don't even think that the Shia are Muslim. So the Shias have always been, in most countries, marginalized and often the downtrodden group. Now here they have their own country. They have established themselves as an Islamic republic. So this is of concern to a lot of the Sunni states in the Gulf, particularly Saudi Arabia.
Well,
it's also
the concern is what, that there's some kind of military push, or
yes, that if you get a nuclear armed nuclear armed Iran, it's a country of 75 million people, one of the largest countries in the Middle East. I think only Egypt is larger. You suddenly got a power, and if they have nuclear arms or the capacity to make nuclear arms, that's going to change the power dynamic. So a lot of the Sunnis are very concerned. Now we saw that in Syria, and we see that in Syria. Iran is playing a role in propping up the Assad regime because the Assad is a Alawite, which is related to the Shia, and you have lots of Sunni folks who are really leading the uprising and the civil war in that. So Iran has lots of fingers in lots of places. Israel views Iran, and particularly a potentially nuclear Iran, with great trepidation. And as you know, Israel is pushing very hard for the United States to bomb or attack militarily the nuclear facilities, as a way of trying to stop the progress. So there are lots of lots of implications for this. If suddenly the United States and Iran begin to cooperate, I'm not saying we're going to be extremely close friends, but at least cooperate on some of these problems, that can begin to have some implications for the whole Middle East.
Well, David, and what is your...
Well, one thing that I think we have to remember is, I think, yes, I completely agree with what Jess has just said in terms of, the geopolitical dynamics and how things could be changed. At the same time, I think we have to remember how we got there, and whether or not there will be a relationship developing or whether we're still negotiating a deal is important, because to me it seems that Iran has agreed to make so many concessions for two reasons. One is because they want sanctions to be relieved, or at least some sanctions, because they're feeling the pressure. So that indicates that a relationship is still far to be developing with the United States. And second is because they've achieved a lot in getting closer to a nuclear hedge capability already. So even though they're getting closer to the United States, they are getting closer.
You mean relationship-wise?
Relationship-wise. Now, we're not going to get buddies anytime soon. It's still a relationship that has implications.
I just like to underscore this. I think a lot of the critics of this deal have said, we lost, we gave everything away. But if you look at it, if you really evaluate it, we got everything. That is, the U.S. got, and the P+5 got everything. And really, Iran didn't get very much. Yes, they're lifting the amount, as I think David said, the amount of the sanctions is about $7 billion, and it's their own money. We've frozen, and we're still freezing and holding some $50 to $100 billion that belongs to Iran, and so we're going to release about $7 billion as, I think it's more of a show of good faith or goodwill, but we've gotten a lot out of this.
Well, Jess, I can see how you're right, but there sure is a lot of opposition to, or noise, and some of it's got to be legitimate in terms of opposition to this interim deal, and I think before we address this, I just want to point out to our audience, and Mr. Producer, if you would get photograph number 6 ready here, and go ahead and put that up. I want to stress to the audience, we've been talking about the concept of whether you do a deal or a relationship. And it's interesting that Professor Salacuse has got a fabulous book that is just being released in paperback today, and he talks a lot in this book about the nature of that relationship and what are the implications and how that impacts the deal, because the deal really depends upon a relationship in order to survive. And I'm not going to read you from the book now. I'm not going to spoil it, but I will tell you that.
I'm not mentioning the title, David.
It's called, well, the audience has just seen the cover page, but it's called Negotiating Life. And but on pages 45 and 52, if you've got a copy of Professor Salacuse's new book, it's right there. And this all has to do with this context, looking at it from the 50,000-foot level, and on one hand, I see the critics looking at the specific deal points in criticizing those, and this point that Jess, you and David are making about this is really the very embryonic stages of the possibility of a new relationship. I don't see that being addressed, and it opens up on the negative side some serious questions, but it opens up on the positive side some things that we haven't even begun to talk about.
Well, I think a lot of the critics tend to focus on the fact that suddenly we're talking, suddenly we're making concessions. However, whether or not these concessions are big doesn't matter. It's suddenly we exchanging ideas. We talking with them where, even though we shouldn't. So that's really what's at issue. It doesn't really matter the type of concessions we get.
Could I also suggest, maybe I'm being cynical, but some of this criticism are really coming from political opponents of President Obama and this administration. In other words, so to what extent are they really looking at the substance, or to what extent are they trying to undermine or attack President Obama and his program?
I mean, I agree, and I think, again, if you look at the deal, at the substance of the deal, most of the sensitive areas are being stopped or capped, and in a verifiable manner. I mean, this is a real achievement. So, and that's what makes me, argue that if you criticize the deal, you really didn't want a deal. You didn't want to actually engage with Iran. And that's fine. That's an argument. Okay, we shouldn't talk.
Jess,
I know. I think that's absolutely right. I think that there are people who say these are evil people. They're part of the axis of evil. We ought not to talk to them. And you often see that where you've had intractable conflicts, where the parties really bear tremendous enmity because of historic grievances or others, and it's often very hard and it takes the courage, I think, leadership courage, to say to a particular group of people that you're leading, okay, it's time for us to move on. It's time to us to look at a new era. What's past has to be past, but let's try to build a new something new. I also want to ask David. It seems to me we're getting something else out of this, David, aren't we? We're getting a lot of information about the state of Iran's nuclear development, and isn't that in itself valuable intelligence?
Even in the public domain, we're hearing more about the actual specifics.
No, I think Jess is referring to the verification process itself.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is, so there's the verification aspects of Iran's nuclear program, but something extremely significant as well is Iran has agreed to make comprehensive declarations to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is going to be verifying Iran's activities. So it's opening up its facilities and is prepared to engage with inspectors in a way that was not even imaginable a few months back.
Valuable point, Jess.
I think that's valuable. I mean, now we really have now hard knowledge and a way of continuing to have hard knowledge about the state of their nuclear development in a way we really didn't have before.
Yeah, that's right. And we are going to go to a break here. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you are watching the nuclear deal with Iran here on Asian Review. I'm your host, David Day, and we have much more to come with David Santoro here in the studio and Professor Jeswald Salacuse in Boston. We'll see you on the other side of the break. Asian Review, I'm your host, David Day, and our program this evening is called The Iran Nuclear Deal. And we have as our special guests David Santoro with Pacific Forum CSIS. David is a nuclear expert having to do with policy and nuclear deterrence. And we also have as a special guest from the Fletcher School of Law and International Diplomacy, Professor Jeswald Salacuse. Mr. Producer, let's take a look at photograph number 2 here, if we could. And so, to our audience, I want to represent, this is a aerial shot of the Iraq heavy water facility. I believe it's south of Tehran, some 120 miles. And photograph number 3, Mr. Producer, this is another shot of the same facility. And David, what is this facility all about? Why are we dealing with this at all or talking about it?
So this is, so as you said, this is a heavy water reactor, and this was not a focus of the negotiations over the past 10 years. It was an issue, but not a focus, because the negotiations focused more on enrichment. But during the in the lead up to this deal, the French in particular pointed that out as something.
I knew there was a reason we had you on this show, right?
See, there you go. I had to bring that up. I figured.
It's the French.
That's right.
Bless their hearts.
Well, they sort of insisted that this is an issue that had to be addressed, particularly because this reactor can produce plutonium, which is one of the pathways that can get you to a bomb.
All right. So let's help our audience for a second. There's two ways to get to the bomb.
Right.
One way is heavy water.
One way is through the plutonium route.
Plutonium route. That's this Iraq
Right.
reactor that we just showed a picture of. And Mr. Producer, if you go to photograph number 4, here's a close-in shot, just to let you know that that we can get close to this reactor, but not inside. Okay, so one path is through plutonium. Now, does there anything about this Iraq heavy water facility that's incorporated in the deal?
Well, so as part of this interim deal, Iran has agreed to suspend work on its Iraq facility, which is in itself significant because, as I said, this is a pathway to a bomb. Now, the hard work, again, will come when we get to a comprehensive agreement. How are we going to deal with this reactor moving forward? Right now, the agreement is that work is suspended on that reactor.
Okay, so let's go back to the second pathway to the bomb, and that is through taking an enriched uranium process, correct?
Right, correct.
And so this deal does what with uranium enrichment?
So the way it works is, so uranium needs to be enriched, and if you enrich up to 20%, then you can dash very quickly to a bomb by enriching up to 90%.
Okay.
Now, the good thing that this deal has done is Iran has agreed to stop and neutralized, and we can talk a little bit more about this, its stockpile of 20% enriched uranium, which is significant because, as I said, the 20% enriched uranium will get you quickly to a bomb.
Okay. Jess, we're not ignoring you, not trying to get down into the weeds too far, but my recollection is that Iran is has been in the past, until the sanctions were really slapped down a little tighter, a major world producer of oil and gas. Yes?
Yeah. Yes, it was. But again, its industrial or economy has been crippled by the sanctions, not only by the sanctions, but by the very bad economic management of the predecessor government, which was Ahmadinejad's government, which really, for example, was using the central bank as basically a piggy bank, just to invest in all sorts of projects and that had really not much success. They've had terrible inflation. So actually, one of the things that Rouhani is trying to do, not only to negotiate this, he's trying to get his economy back into shape in a much more pragmatic and sound way, and that's clearly on his agenda. Ahmadinejad was very much of a populist. Was kind of fueling public needs through spending money. I think when Rouhani came into power and he took a look at what they had in terms of what reserves, basically the country is broke. So it needs to get its industry going again. It needs to get its oil industry working, and all of that is going to take money.
All right. So let me ask you two related questions to this. The oil and gas industry in Iran, very significant world power and in this area and reserves. If you have, first, I don't really see Saudi Arabia interest, except in reaction to Iran, producing nuclear power plants. And why would a country that is rich in oil and gas go down the pathway of developing nuclear power plants if they're not using the whole nuclear power plant creation, that industry, as a cover for a weapons program?
Again, we're going to find out a lot more about why they're doing this. But again, this is a country of 75 million people. It's a growing population. They certainly don't have the reserves of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has tremendous reserves. They also want to diversify their energy sources. So they see this develop peaceful uses of under the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. They're entitled under international law to develop the peaceful uses of the. And David can correct me if I'm wrong. They are entitled to develop the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, and they feel they have an international right to do it.
To add to that as well, I mean, it's about the peaceful use of nuclear technology, but also I think having a nuclear program has become almost a symbol of national pride, or it's become part and parcel of how Iran defines itself, particularly the enrichment part.
Was this why after this deal was negotiated, David, we saw Rouhani saying, to the Iranian people, this agreement allows us to continue our right to enrichment? And Kerry says no, it doesn't?
Right. So there was a big argument about the right, whether or not Iran has the right to develop enrichment under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. This was actually, and I'll bring up the French angle again, in addition to the Arak reactor, something that the French negotiator pushed hard to not include, a word that they did not want to include in the deal, that Iran had the right to actually conduct enrichment activities. And that word does not appear in the deal. Now, at the same time, the deal says that once the comprehensive agreement is concluded, if there's one, there will be a mutually defined enrichment program in Iran. So, it's a victory for the P5+1 in that they can say, look, there's no right to enrichment, but it's a victory from the Iranian perspective who can say, look, we will have implicit
we will
right
be able
to
to
enrich.
do something.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So again, it depends on your perspective.
Yeah. Jess?
But David, from the point of view of the treaty itself, there's nothing specific that prevents a country from engaging in enrichment as such.
That's correct. That's correct. There's nothing in the treaty that says you cannot enrich. Now, and that, I'm not a lawyer, but lawyers, if you look at the specific negotiations of the NPT, could argue that there was a big fight during negotiations as to whether that word should be included in the treaty, and because it's not, therefore it doesn't make a case strong enough to say that this is something that you can do as the treaty.
Just pushing that a little bit, but if the intent of enrichment was to develop and become a nuclear power, which is to develop a bomb, which is prevented under the agreement,
Right.
then that might be grounds for saying you can enrich, but you can't enrich for the purpose of building a bomb.
Well, in that case, whatever nuclear activity you conduct cannot be conducted for the purpose of manufacturing a nuclear weapon. So whether it's enrichment or anything, you'd be in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
All right, let's hold one on this point for just a second here, so we don't lose the public here. What's the value? Why, if you were not going to make a bomb, if you're not involved in a weapons program, why would you enrich uranium?
Enrichment helps in many ways conduct a certain number of activities arguably more efficiently, but it's not necessary to if you want to develop nuclear power.
So what you're saying is that an enriched uranium allows you to step up the efficiency and performance of a nuclear power plant?
Arguably it is, but it really isn't necessary.
Okay, and are there some other reasons that you would want to have a uranium enrichment program other than weapons and power plant?
No, I don't know.
Are there medical purposes that you would enrich?
You can use it for specific, like for instance, Iran, because we're talking about Iran, argues that it needs enriched uranium in its research reactor, which is essentially meant to treat cancer. So it's meant for medical purposes.
Okay, we are coming up on a break, ladies and gentlemen, and when we come back after the break, we are going to talk a little bit more about some of the geopolitical ramifications of this 6-month interim deal with Iran. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about Hamas and Hezbollah. But I'm David Day. You're watching Asian Review, and this is the Iran nuclear deal, and we are coming at you live from the Pioneer Plaza right here in the heart of downtown Honolulu. I'll see you on the other side of the break.
Aloha, I'm Jay Fidel. This is Think Tech Hawaii, broadcasting live from the Pioneer Plaza in downtown Honolulu. We raise public awareness about tech, energy, and globalism in Hawaii. Technology is critical to our state. A vibrant tech sector will give us new prospects in the global marketplace and will offer great careers and make our economy more resilient. Streaming live on Ustream and Spreaker, ThinkTech allows its hosts and guests invaluable opportunities to report important events and discuss important questions, and to be heard here in Hawaii and around the world. You can find links to our live streams on thinktechhawaii.com or on our mobile website, m.thinktechhawaii.com. And you can see our archive on YouTube. It's all just a click away. We want to do whatever we can to keep Hawaii relevant, connected, and thriving in the complexity of the 21st century. We hope you will help us in those efforts. Tune in today. This is Think Tech. I'm Jay Fidel. Mahalo.
You're watching the Iran deal here on Asian Review. I'm your host, David Day, and we have as our special guest Mr. David Santoro from Pacific Forum, a nuclear expert in the studio with us, and via digital Skype, we have Professor Jeswald Salacuse from the Fletcher School in Boston. And gentlemen, let's take kind of a different approach to what we've been talking about now. We've covered some aspects of the deal, and one of the concerns is that Iran has been a hotbed of state-sponsored terrorism, I think, with support for Hamas and Hezbollah. Jess, you've lived in Lebanon before. This is probably sometime in the past, and we've got Netanyahu making some very strong statements about this whole deal is a historic mistake. We've talked a little bit about the concern about maybe a shift in relationship between the United States and Iran is a piece of this, but the international community has got to be concerned with the possibility of the proliferation of nuclear weapons into terrorist groups, and I know that this is a reason why there is some outspoken opposition to this deal, both in the United States Congress as well as around the world, and as we step back and look at this deal, think in the context of a precedent situation. How do you think this plays in Pyongyang?
Sorry?
How do you think this deal with Iran sits in North Korea?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, it's an example. We did have some negotiations with North Korea back during the 90s, and we got some sort of an agreement. But at the end of within a few years, North Korea backpedaled. So I think
why do we have a deal now with Iran and no deal then with North Korea?
Well, we had a deal, but where we were going to provide them with aid, and they were going to reduce their nuclear ambitions, and then they backed out of that. I think now I think it's a different situation. Iran is not North Korea. I think Iran is a much more different, politically a much more different animal. I think they've got. They are not the police state that North Korea is. So I think we have a deal now because both sides see it in their interests, or think a deal, the right kind of deal, would be in their interest. And one of the reasons is they look to their alternatives. Iran is in terrible economic shape. It must lift the sanctions if it's going to build its economy. I think that's a very important priority for Rouhani. The U.S. It does not want to go to war again. I think the U.S. It does not think a military strike would do very much to put back, to eliminate, certainly eliminate Iran's nuclear capability. So you begin, and that's often what leads parties to negotiate. They look at their alternatives.
Right,
and the alternatives are very good.
Yeah.
So you move forward on this. We're moving forward on this track.
Okay. And David, we're just about out of time here. What's your take on this?
I think I agree that there are two different situations in the sense that North Korea has nuclear weapons, Iran does not. Has a nuclear weapons capability, I guess you could argue, but no nuclear weapons. So there are two different situations. The other thing as well is that in North Korea, the deal is Pyongyang says we want nuclear weapons and economic developments, and the U.S. says no, you can't have both. We're not going to let you have economic development if you keep nuclear weapons. In the case of Iran, it's a completely different situation because they don't have nuclear weapons yet, or they have nuclear capabilities but no nuclear weapons. And so this deal can show that yes, there's a solution can be found where you're going to have a flourishing economy if you do not develop nuclear weapons, which again Iran has promised as part of this deal and in repeated statements.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we are just about out of time here, and David and Jess, I want to thank you for helping us take a little scratch out of the surface of this Iran nuclear deal, and obviously there's a lot more to go, a lot more to talk about, and if you're both willing, we'd like to invite you to join us again for another program on the Iran nuclear deal, because there's a lot more depth and a lot more to talk about here. And I hope that's something that's of interest to both of you. I know it would be of interest to our audience.
I'd be glad to do it.
All right. And ladies and gentlemen, I suppose if the little rubric for the show this week is if you like your bomb, you can keep it. Maybe the little rubric that we'll have for next week's show, if you like your air defense zone, you can keep that too. And so next week we'll be talking about China's air defense zone imposed over the Senkaku Islands, and we'll get into that next week. I hope you'll join us. Please have a safe drive home. I'm David Day for Asian Review, and Jess in Boston, good night. And David,
good night.
Here representing the French, thank you again and good night.